What's something you learned in history class that you feel like wasn't the whole truth? Better yet, what's something you didn't learn at all that was omitted completely? That's what I like to call redacted history. My name is Andre White, the host of the Redacted History Podcast, the place where history's forgotten events, heroes, and villains get their story told, one episode at a time. The Redacted History Podcast. Real history never dies. Stream the Redacted History Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota and Danny Abdel-Jabbar, and we are also greeted by a special guest, Matthew Hoh. How's it going?
Good, guys. Good. Thanks for having me back on.
Thanks for coming back on. And just to give a quick introduction, Matt, this is I think the third or fourth time you've been on the show. We love talking to you. Just a quick summary of Matt's background. He was a decorated captain in the Marine Corps, and then he worked in the State Department as part of the Provincial Reconstruction Team in Afghanistan. So Matt, really happy to have you back on, and I guess pressing. We're at a weird time because it's 7:40 p.m. on February 1st, Thursday. This show is going to be released tomorrow morning. So we don't even know what is going to happen between now and this episode being released. But I guess in the context, to not to go too far off, there's been 3 U.S. soldiers who have tragically died in a base in Jordan, allegedly by militias backed by Iran. So we're all kind of waiting. What's the response going to be from the United States? Is this going to escalate into a regional war, which we've all been, really praying would not happen? But I guess you can already argue that it is a regional war at this point. But Danny, I guess I'll let you take the first question.
Yeah, so I think I got the news of this a couple days ago, obviously, and it was just I was busy and moving about, and I see this alert on my phone, and it's like, 3 American soldiers died in Jordan, and from allegedly Iran-backed militias, and I'm like, what is going on? And it took me like a day and a half to be able to catch up on the news because I was kind of busy, and I just felt very like, what just happened, right? Did something big really happen? So what I was hoping to do is, kind of flesh that out a little bit. Matt, can you give us some background as to like what exactly happened and whether or not you feel that this is like a turning point or a major escalation or anything like that?
Yeah. How far back do you want to go in terms of setting up the context?
As far as you'd like to go.
1953.
Yeah, you can. I mean, certainly. I mean, and that's one of the aspects of this is that where do you put the starting date? When do you say history begins? And you can go back farther than 53. Of course, there's that great scene in Airplane where he says, "Johnny, get me up to speed on what's been happening." He says, "First the dinosaurs came." Right? So how far back do we want to go? But even in my life, the storyline in my life has been very clear of like this Manichaean struggle between the evil Iranians and the Americans who are out just to, we're just in the Persian Gulf trying to keep things peaceful, trying to make sure people can get, oil flowing out to them, right? I mean, like I was born in 73, so one of my earliest moments is the hostage crisis in Iran in 1979. And people putting yellow ribbons around the trees, and the hostages came back to West Point, and my family lived not far from there. So I remember all that, and like to just this, our whole life has been with this very binary struggle between the United States and Iran. And it's important to note that because that dominates so much of American foreign policy thinking. It's dominated so much of what the United States has done in the Persian Gulf, in the Middle East, throughout the world. I mean, this obsession with Iran, I mean, just all the different points we can look at and say, wow, this is, I mean, certainly go back to, say, the Iraq War, the invasion of Iraq in 2003 by the United States. A lot of that has to do with Iran. If you go back to the Project of New America Century, PNAC, which were the neoconservatives in the 90s who put together this plan to basically ensure that the American empire would prosper in this new world order, as well as in the new century that was coming. The crown jewel and all that, the thing that they obsess about the most is Iran. So there's this cockamamie plan, and there are multiple reasons for the invasion of Iraq, of course, but one of them is the idea is that we're gonna create a country in Iraq that's going to serve as a total hedge against Iran. It's going to throw everything off balance. The Iranians are going to be on their back foot, and we're going to remake the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, that type of thinking has dominated administration after administration. So you get to the, say, 2011, 2012, the Syrian civil war. And in Washington, D.C., that becomes an avenue to weaken Iran. That becomes a way to hurt Iran by taking out, one of its main allies, Bashar Assad's government. Mm-hmm. And you could see this because in 2017, a guy named Michael Vickers, who was the head of intelligence for the Department of Defense, he also been head of special operations and low intensity conflict branch. He had been involved in the U.S. operations in Afghanistan against the Soviets in the 80s. He's in charge of the U.S. war in the U.S. participation in the Syrian war. And in 2017, I believe it was 2017, he writes this op-ed for the Washington Post where he says how we really missed our chance. We should have done more in Syria because that was the best opportunity we were going to have to weaken Iran. So there's 500,000 people killed in Syria, millions of refugees, just a totally destroyed country. To the guy who's at the top of the pyramid at the Pentagon, one of the most important people in the Obama administration when it comes down to things like this, he doesn't even think about the Syrians. It's all about Iran, right? Mm-hmm. And so why are the U.S. troops still in these countries? Why do we still have troops in Syria? Why do we still have troops in Iraq? And it will always come back to Iran, even though the stated ostensible reason from the United States is we're there to counter the Islamic State. These troops are there to make sure the Islamic State doesn't resurface. And there's multiple reasons. I mean, certainly the United States has its Kurdish allies, so they're there to bolster the Kurds' claims to parts of Syria, but most of it has to do, with Iran. I mean, why those troops who were killed in Tower 22 in the northeast part of Jordan, where Jordan, Iraq, and Syria all intersect, what's the importance of that? Well, you have the Al-Tanf base. There's about 12 or so American military bases in Syria, and they're mainly outposts. There's not a lot. A lot of them are there so that helicopters can land, or special operations troops can utilize them. There's one base in particular that's meant, it's right at the oil fields there in Syria, so it's really seen as just a very symbolic. We own this. This is ours, right? That kind of thing. But you see with say the Al-Tanf base, which is probably the one that most people are familiar with, and which is the one that is closest to this Tower 22 location in Jordan, in that the Tower 22 location would have been supporting with helicopters and drones, as well as with logistics support. Well, the purpose of that is because that is meant as a barrier between Iran and Syria. So if you go back 10 years ago, you'd hear all these people in D.C. talking about a land bridge. We can't allow them to have a land bridge. And a land bridge is what idiots call a road.
You mean a road? Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you need any example of how I'm not going to say. I'm going to say something.
Superfluous. How about that?
Yeah, that's a polite way of saying, right? I mean, what I want to say about these people. But this idea of calling it a land bridge when it's a road, man. Yeah. So anyway, but that's the idea, is that we've got these troops kind of in between Iran and Syria so that they can't just easily drive through. Now, of course, they fly all the time and everything else, and there's plenty of other reasons out. So
They're
it's kind of a
still
silly
moving
thing.
around.
But you get to this point of like, what are these troops doing there? And then one of the big reasons, and this won't be said out loud, but certainly is a very real reason. And when you see people like Lindsey Graham talk or Tom Cotton talk, or you hear the ghost of John McCain, you realize that this other reason, this idea that these troops are bait, that they're a tripwire, really comes through. Because these forces in Iraq that have been attacking U.S. troops in Syria and Iraq, the Kataib Hezbollah is one of them, but there's an umbrella group called the Islamic Resistance of Iraq. And these groups come out of the U.S. occupation, right? These are primarily the Shia groups that are fighting against the Americans. And then during the Syrian civil war, as well as, of course, Iraq's war against the Islamic State, because in 2014, the Islamic State comes into, well, actually it begins before that, but people recall, you have the Islamic State in 2014 taking Mosul. And at that point, they'd already taken many parts of northern and western Iraq as well. But these popular mobilization forces, as they're kind of officially called, the PMF, they're Shia militias. And they're the ones who defeated the Islamic State in Iraq on the ground. They certainly had support from the American Air Force and the American Navy, but they're the ones who did the fighting. They're the ones who defeated the Islamic State in the ground. They also did that to a great degree in Syria as well. The Kurds did it quite a bit, but these forces, and you see this convergence then because the Iranians are involved with these groups. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps officers led these groups many times. They provided training, support, and then coming from the West, you had Hezbollah as well. So you've got this linkage that people always talk about is real. I mean, it's not as nefarious. It's not like out of something like out of it's not, in the sense that you'd have like a Rocky and Bullwinkle moment with Boris and Natasha with these groups like plotting big trouble. But, because of a variety of reasons for them to work together, a variety of common values, if you want to call it that, in terms of ethnicity, background, religion, but primarily the threat from the Islamic State, past history of threats from whether it's other Sunni groups or outside forces like the United States, these groups have converged. And this has been going on for quite a while, but during the Syrian civil war, during Iraq's war against the Islamic State, this really comes to a peak. And so what you have now, of course, these years later, is you have these forces that are opposed to the continued American presence in Iraq. And so that's the first factor as to why are they shooting rockets and missiles and drones, firing off mortars and other things at American forces in Iraq and in Syria. It goes back to the fact that they see them, and rightly so, as occupation forces, and they want them out. And so what you've had for a number of years now, going back at least 5 years to 2019, is, at different times it flares up. So if people can recall back 2019, a lot of attacks on American forces in Iraq, including things where genuine, real concern that the U.S. Embassy might be overrun. And then, of course, that culminates then in January 2020, about a day or two after the New Year, when the United States assassinates Qasem Soleimani, as well as the Iraqi head of these militias. He gets forgotten about quite a bit, that became a crisis. And fortunately, that was something that ended very surprised most of us, I think, in the sense that it was just a simple tit for tat. We killed General Soleimani. The Iranians responded with missile strikes on an American air base in Iraq, and it was left at that. But throughout this time has been, every now and again, I shouldn't say every now and again, but over that period of time from 2020 through this past fall, the fall of 2023, there are about 60 or 70 attacks on American bases. So you're talking about 20 attacks a year, by these groups. And sometimes, and it's also hard to tell whether or not it was these groups or could have also been Sunni groups, the Islamic State, basically, because they are still operating to a degree. But you've had these attacks and you've had casualties by American forces, including, at least, if I recall correctly, 2 American contractors that have died over the last several years because of these attacks. But then what happens, of course, is you have the October 7th attacks by Hamas on Israel. You have Israel's response. And so not only now do these groups not want the United States occupying their country, don't want them still in Syria, don't want them in the Middle East at all, but they also see the United States, rightly, as being allied with Israel and Israel's genocide against the Palestinians. And so, this idea that this is a way to stand up for the Palestinians is to attack the Americans. And so, basically, venting their displeasure at the American role in that genocide by attacking the American troops in those countries. And one of those things that, that you notice is that I haven't seen it remarked upon, but the story is that this drone that hit the Tower 22 base in Jordan, killed those 3 soldiers and wounded about 30 others. It was successful because there was an American drone returning to that base, and so the American air defenses were stood down, and this drone was able to get in that way. Whether that was just luck or whether they had observed
Careful
this
planning.
and it was planned, who knows? But it was successful. Now the thing about that I haven't seen her discussed is what was that American drone doing?
Right.
I don't know what type of drone it was, so I don't know what the range was.
Surveillance,
or anything like that.
could be a predator.
Exactly. Was that providing surveillance over Gaza?
Right.
American drones are part of that effort. They are over Gaza. They're not dropping bombs or firing missiles, but they are utilizing their sensors to provide targeting information to the Israelis. So, as much as our Department of Defense and our White House want to say there's no connection at all between the Americans there and what's happening in Gaza, well, there certainly is. And if you watch the video from the Islamic resistance in Iraq of the drone that they fired at night, but they have a footage, and the way they frame it is that this is the drone. They have a little Palestinian flag next to the drone. Right, so you have this idea that they're attacking them. Or they've been attacking U.S. forces for years because they want them there, but now there's this genocide occurring, and they see this as one big fight.
Right.
And so, getting back to what was said earlier, that we are in a regional war, and we haven't even talked about what's happening in Yemen, of course, where the Houthis,
Ansar Allah,
have been blockading the Red Sea for 2 months now, essentially. And the United States has now responded, I think, with 12, it's 12 now, air attacks, missile and missile strikes, bombs and missiles being fired from planes as well. And so it really is, how can you not say this is not a regional war? And now to the point of, hey, it's 7:57 here on the East Coast on Thursday. What's going to happen next? There could be these attacks against Iran. American media is saying that the American strikes will last for many days, but that they won't attack in Iran itself, that they'll attack Iranian targets in Iraq and Syria. We'll see how that happens, what actually does occur. But I think the White House does not want a war with Iran, just as I think the Iranian government doesn't want a war with the United States. But there certainly are a lot of pressures throughout this on all sides that could force a country to do something more than what will be allowed by the other side, to only have a corresponding tit for tat, right? So the tit gets sent, and then it's not just a tat; it's a tat tat tat,
right,
or
many
tats, or something
right.
like that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up a lot of the interconnectedness of how Iran's influence in the region and these seemingly separate but clearly all linked up militant groups, how they play together. Because we just did an episode last week on Hezbollah, and a couple of the main points that we pointed out there was, the superficial way to look at it is that they're both Shia, right? And so that's why they're friends. But realistically, there's a lot of different, very deep links between the two groups, Iran and Hezbollah. And indeed, the same could be said for the Houthis and some of these other rebel groups in Syria and elsewhere. That is beyond just the religious motivation, right? One of the founding, principles, I think, came from Ayatollah Khomeini, if I'm remembering correctly from the episode we just did last week, which was, this idea of categorizing people into two groups, right? The oppressors and the oppressed. And, Khomeini was really good at pointing out the fact that they, Iran, and by extension other Shia in the region, were the oppressed, and the oppressors were, among many, people like Israel, people like anyone in the West, like the United States, and to a lesser degree, Russia. And that was just like a second column in that, a rationality for them coming together. So I really find it interesting playing out in real life, right? Because we just did this episode on Hezbollah, and then the weekend after we see an Iranian-backed, militant group striking Tower 22 in Jordan. And so it's interesting to see how that dynamic, that influence dynamic, is playing out in a very, very real way, like right now. So with that being said, it's kind of so what, now what, right? Yeah. So, all right, cool. They are friends or whatever, and they bombed us. Now what, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it's important, Danny, you brought up that type of context and that type of background, because, the way I started talking off of about being a 7-year-old kid seeing the yellow ribbons, right, around the trees, and what was that about, and the whole storyline. And you have with that Hezbollah Iranian intersection, this idea of exactly that, fighting against the oppressors. And the Iranian storyline in the 1980s is we just freed ourselves from foreign oppression. Yep. And they look and they see, and then there's certainly theological, political,
100%, yeah.
Right, involved in this, and they want to. But this idea too is they can look and they can say, well, here's Lebanon. Here's exactly, they're just like us, and they are under, oppression. They've been oppressed and occupied by the French for however long.
Right.
And now, by the time a couple of years later, 1982, the Israelis are occupying Lebanon. I mean, so you have this storyline that intersects, and what you get from that is Hezbollah, right? I mean, so that connection of Iran being, I don't know if you want to call it a midwife for Hezbollah, but in many ways you can kind of, that might be too strong, might be too dramatic, but there is that connection there that the Iranians were involved in Lebanon in particularly the early 80s when Hezbollah was born. Right. I mean, and certainly why were the targets in 1983? Another thing that I remember clearly as a boy, I was 10 years old when the Marine barracks are hit, when the embassies are hit, including the French embassy and the American embassy. It was the French and the Americans, right? The occupiers. Right. I mean, so and if you were to go and you were to talk to any of the fighters who are with Kataib Hezbollah, which is the main Iraqi resistance group that we're talking about here, it's the one that the Americans are pointing and saying these are the guys that did it. If you talk to any of the Iranians, if you talk to same thing too, if you talk to any of the Israelis, they are going to tell you a story about why they're doing this, why they're involved. And it doesn't necessarily have a start date. It might, but it certainly, if you were to go and speak with the Israeli soldiers who are part of the campaign in Gaza right now, of course, many of them are going to say, yes, October 7th. But if you get them to speak for a sentence longer than that, they will tell you some story, right? And for many of them, that story will go back to
quite a while.
Quite a while, exactly. Yeah. Quite a while. I mean, and that's, I think, what's so important about all this is, now you get to the concepts of strategic empathy, right? Of understanding your adversary, understanding your foe, understanding your allies. Because how else can you operate against them? How else can you operate with them? If and this becomes a real concern because take this issue. We spoke briefly about what's happening in the Red Sea, and you see the American insistence. It has nothing to do with Gaza, and I can tell you that type of insistence that is just not an external one, but it's also an internal one. And you hear this from, say, a guy like Josh Paul, who resigned back in October. Josh was he was in charge of the basically the congressional review process for the State Department to send weapons overseas. He's a career civil servant. This is what he did. He was part of the arms transfers, arms sales, knew the process very well. And if you listen to him Josh talk, he will say how there was, at the political level, a narrative that couldn't be budged. It didn't matter. It was as if you were dealing with somebody who was saying, the sky is purple or yellow.
Yeah.
Like that was their reality, and there is no budging it. And I can tell you a number of stories that I saw just like that when I was involved in these types of things. Like my first year in Iraq, we were not allowed to use the words occupation at all.
Really?
When I came back, oh no, not at all. I mean, it was you get yourself in a lot of trouble saying occupation, right? And then I get back and I go to the State Department, and I'm on the Iraq desk of the State Department and taking part in these interagency meetings. So you got folks from CIA, you got folks from the Agriculture Department there. I mean, like everyone's there, and I mean there is a narrative. There is a construct in place of what is allowed. It's very Orwellian. Right, and you again are not allowed to say occupation. You're not allowed to describe it as an occupation.
If not occupation, what do you say?
That's exactly right. And at that point, we were crafting. This is the fall of '05, and we're crafting this document. And, this is embarrassing to admit, but I was part of it. The national strategy for victory in Iraq. Well, how do you craft a national strategy for victory when you won't even acknowledge the reality of the circumstance? A number of times I went to you'd be in a briefing, and the intelligence guys would present about the insurgency, and they would present like with these org charts that you thought you were in an episode of The Wire, the way they talk about them, and like as it's a criminal network, and then they go through all which is not really the most appropriate thing, I should say, to describe how an insurgency works, but. There are some similarities, but for the most part, it was pretty lazy. But then the other thing is you get to the question of what's motivating these guys. How come they're killing us? How come they're putting roads on the sides of the bombs on the side of the road?
Because they hate our freedom.
That's exactly right.
Oh my God, I was joking. That
was the type of thing, is that they were, you would see like a long list of reasons, and they'd be criminal element, dead enders, basically, if you remember that term, right? So like these former Ba'ath Party or Iraqi military guys who are just not going to give up. They were opportunists. They were, but the idea that they were doing it because they were occupied can't be said. Be said. And so how do you formulate a plan when you can't even utter the actual reality of what's happening? How you can't even put forward a clear understanding of what you're up against, right? I mean, so when you hear these things about how whether it's from John Kirby or from Matt Miller at the State Department, saying we don't believe this is at all tied, we don't see it as being tied to what's happening in Gaza. What happened in Jordan has nothing to do with what's happening in Gaza. Well, that's not what the guys that fired that drone said. So how are you going to put together a plan, let alone a larger strategy, to not just get yourself out of this crisis, but to prevent future crisis and bring about some stability? But, so it's a real concern when you hear these people talking this way, because, it's not just, I shouldn't say in such deliberate or absolute terms, but it could very well be not just external talking points, but very much internal talking points. And we've seen this. I mean, I can give you examples from my life, give you examples from, with the current Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. If people go back to 2015, they'll remember that 50 intelligence analysts at Central Command, which is the U.S. warfighting organization for the Middle East, when Secretary Austin was General Austin in charge of Central Command, back in 2015, 50 intelligence analysts, both military and civilian, both members of Central Command as well as Defense Intelligence Agency, went to the Inspector General and said, General Austin is cooking the intelligence. He's changing what we are giving him to meet the political narrative. So what General Austin is telling President Obama is not what we are telling General Austin. And we can give you example after example. If there was an investigation, and what do you know? General Austin was not found to be guilty of anything, and now he's Secretary of Defense, right? But I mean, even in my own case, when I resigned from Afghanistan, and I have to go to what's called the PAB, the President's Intelligence Advisory Board. At that point, it was run by former Senators Chuck Hagel and David Boren. And Hagel at that point at Georgetown teaching, and Boren is running the University of Oklahoma. And I've got to go in there and talk to the PAB, basically testify to the PAB about the fact that, as Hagel and Boren both said, how come when I read what you're saying, it matches up with all these captains and majors and colonels who are coming through our schools or telling us about what's going on in Afghanistan. And it doesn't look anything at all like what is going on the president's desk. I mean, so this is a very real problem about, what type of information is going to Joe Biden, what kind of information is going to Lloyd Austin and to, Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, and where is that getting massaged, to put it politely, to meet a narrative that may not match reality at all.
I wonder who's doing the massaging. I like to call it window dressing. And who's doing the actual massaging and who's being manipulated by said massaging, right?
Well, I think what happens, Danny, is that you understand who your bosses are, right? So if in my case, like they go back to the Iraq desk in 05 and 06, if you can't say occupation, if you have to, right, then what are you going to give your bosses? Particularly, I can tell you there are meetings where we had a guy or a gal from the Office of the Vice President there, so one of Dick Cheney's people, who was there like with a whip to keep us in line.
To make sure
right?
you didn't
keep us
say
on
occupation.
The political narrative, right? This is, I mean, so once you know that, once you know what your bosses want, now you get into all types of like issues of organizational management and culture, and this is probably this thing, same thing that occurs in your school district or at Coca-Cola or wherever, where people don't want to say no to the boss. They want to please the boss. And, the boss has, said that he or she doesn't want to see this. Well, you get your hand smacked one time. What are you going to do? Right? I mean, and so you have that type of issue that you're dealing with where it becomes self-censoring, basically. And so I would say it comes from Jake Sullivan. It comes from Tony Blinken, right? It comes from Lloyd Austin. But the folks beneath them already know that. If you're working for Victoria Nuland, right, who is probably the most neoconservative member of the United States government, not just now, but going back 2 or 3 administrations as well. And she is the head of political affairs now for the United States Secretary of Defense. She was the number 2 at Secretary of State, at State Department, who. So she was temporarily the number 2 at State. Now she's back as head of political affairs. If you work for her, you are not going to say anything that she's not going to agree with. You'll find ways maybe to get some information in there, but the finished product that goes to her, and then that then goes from her to Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and President Biden, is going to be what she wants. And again, all kinds of stories like this. It was, you saw it over and over again. And so is that the case where you have this thing, whether it's what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, whether it's what's happening in Red Sea, whether it's what's happening in Iraq and Syria, whether it's the estimation of how the Iranians will respond. And the Iranians have the same type of pressures. They have the same type of problems. Right, and you may say, with regards to with as we have this conversation about what the White House is going to do about Iran, it doesn't really matter what the White House explicitly believes it's going to do. Of course, it's going to matter what the Iranians perceive they're going to do. And so this is the whole idea that if we're just going to go tit for tat, but it's got to be much stronger than a normal tit for tat because, Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton are so mad, and Donald Trump, of course, is saying that if he was president, those 3 soldiers would still be alive. So you have, the most important thing in all of this, I think, of course, is the 2024 election. Because domestic politics drive our foreign policy, right? So now maybe you have Jake Sullivan, whose background is not national security, his background is political campaigns, who as a national security advisor is probably the one who is leading this effort. He may be thinking, well, it's got to be a little stronger than what it has been in the past. So, how do the Iranians then perceive that? Do they understand it in that context? Or do they say, hey, there's been 45 years of the Americans saying they're going to destroy us, of taking us out of power.
And
there
not.
have been they've been, right? American presidents have promised to do this. They have gone through maximum pressure campaign after maximum pressure campaign. It's now an election year. Who's going to be toughest on Iran? The Israelis, with their lobby and all the pressures that brings on the Americans, they want this. So what if the Iranians see something that is a pretty strong response coming from the Americans, and they think it is something that is geared towards actually pushing regime change? Finally, after 45 years, the Americans are going to do the regime change they've been talking about for all this time. It doesn't matter if that's really what the Americans are going to do. It's what the Iranians perceive. And then you have the issue of are the Iranians concerned about their political leadership survival? Right? Or their theocratic leadership survival.
Right.
As well as, too, will they get into a position with their military where they're concerned, look, if we don't use these missile systems we have, if we don't use these rockets and drones and everything else, we're going to lose them. So we might as well fire them off now. And, so you have, this is how it can start to get out of hand, how it can escalate, and how the whole idea of we're going to control this, we're going to control warfare is a fantasy. It's just not. It's something, it's a force greater than man. It's a supernatural force, if you will. It's not natural, of course, it's man-made, but it has that type of reality. And then, of course, what are the consequences? Certainly when Israel invades Lebanon in 1982, I don't think anyone was saying the consequence is going to be Hezbollah, right? And that was the consequence of it, right?
It was.
So,
yeah. It was. So,
Here's my question. So it's been a couple of days since these soldiers have tragically been killed. And there hasn't been a U.S. response yet, knock on wood. Something can happen any minute. And they're saying that there's going to be a week-long bombing campaign or whatever. What's preventing them from reacting in a drastic way? Meaning, and when I say drastic way, firing on targets in Iran.
It's this fear that the Iranian response will be a response that brings about full-fledged war, right? So you get to this point that if we fire on Iran and kill people in Iran, so this foreign country has attacked our people, the response has to be greater than the attack we've just received. Right? It's the same type of thing. They killed three of our soldiers. Our response can't be what we've done before. We just bomb some missile systems. We kill a few IRGC officials. Right? It has to be a week-long bombing campaign. I think one of the delays we're seeing is possibly the Americans are getting assets into place. Right? So we're moving our B-52s and B-1s and B-2 bombers. We're moving our aerial tank refueling tankers. We're getting things ready, and it takes some time. I think the delay, there could be also 2 other reasons for a delay. I think one, they're desperately hoping that this ceasefire deal that's being talked about the last few days will occur between Israel and Hamas, so they can say, look, really, it's not about this at all. That's completely decoupled. It's a ceasefire now, right? And then the other thing is there may be some desire for the Iranians to get their people out of harm's way. So we're saying we're going to attack targets in Iraq and Syria. Maybe it's an opportunity to give the Iranians a couple days to get there folks out of those places so that Iranian casualties are not so high. Because ideally, in a tit for tat, they killed 3 of ours. You want to kill 3 of theirs, right? You don't want to get in that whole axe, of like, you're escalating from a fist fight to a fight with chains and bats to a fight with knives to a fight with guns, right? I mean, so that's the thing, is like keep it on an even level. But is that controllable? Is that controllable? And so the idea, though, of striking within Iran, what would Iran's response be? Would any country, would any political leadership be able to absorb an attack from another country, particularly from the great Satan, the United States, and hold on to, not have just enormous political pressure to respond? And the response could be quite dramatic. I mean, the Iranians have had 45 years to prepare for this war with the United States. And they may be as incompetent as we are. They may have the same type of incompetence and corruption in our political and military and industrial leadership that we have. But I don't want to bet on that. Right. I don't want to bet on that at all. And we've certainly seen the success of some of the Iranian munitions that Russia has been utilizing, particularly their drones. And so we know that Iran is giving the Russians drones, while the Iranians have an industrial production capacity that can produce a surplus of these things that they can sell them to Russia, right? So they, as well as they have a whole host of missile systems, and then they have allies as well. The Yemenis, who just the Houthis in Yemen, who just fought off the Saudis and the Emiratis for the last 9 years. They've got Hezbollah in southern Lebanon that has beaten the Israeli army, as Hezbollah will tell you, twice. And they have, you guys probably know this better than I did because you just did the show. I mean, they supposedly have 100,000 rockets and missiles, right? I mean, and for the Israelis to do something about that, it's just not about invading southern Lebanon and pushing up to the Litani River and pushing Hezbollah back over that. I mean, you've got to go almost all the way to the northern Lebanese-Syrian border to ensure that rockets can't reach Haifa. So I mean, like, this gets really complicated. And then what happens? And this is kind of like my nightmare scenario for the first few days. What happens if you do get into a really position where the Iranians fear for their political leadership survival? They think this really will be regime change. Their military is concerned that we're in a use it or lose it scenario here, and they who have been preparing for this and who understand the Americans launched these missile strikes on the American air bases in Qatar, in UAE, in Saudi Arabia, the facilities we have in Bahrain, etc., so that the American bases that are in Iraq and Syria are cut off from, or they have a limited support from our ground-based Air Force. And then the same thing, too, the Iranians have been focusing, I can't imagine they wouldn't otherwise, on how do you take out an American aircraft carrier. Right. So whether it's with, cruise missiles or a diesel submarine, what if the one carrier we have there, the Eisenhower, is disabled and she can't launch aircraft? Right. So now you have a situation where the air bases in the Gulf monarchies can't operate or as fully as they want. You can have a disabled aircraft carrier. You can still get aircraft out of Turkey and out of Europe. That's a long haul from Europe, and the bombers can still come. But you're talking about, you now have American troops on the ground in Iraq and Syria who are now presented with combat with these Islamic resistant forces of Iraq, the Popular Mobilization Forces, right? The same guys that defeated the Islamic State on the ground in Syria and Iraq. So very competent, very well trained. What happens then?
Hey, Danny, you know what's annoying?
What's that?
When you go to the store and every razor is behind plexiglass.
Oh, yeah, that stupid lockbox thing, right?
Yeah. And instead of going through the anxiety-stricken process of, asking someone for help, I'll just go home and I'll use my wife's razor. And then my face will feel like I rubbed a cactus on it.
Right. I mean, I bet you had more bumps on your face than an encyclopedia written in Braille.
Yeah, let's just say I'm not trying to do that again. So I picked up a new razor subscription with Harry's. I got the starter kit, and it came in a very nice looking package. And in it, I got a nicely weighed razor with a blade cover, and a small can of shaving cream. And I got to say, it's really awesome.
Yeah, I picked one up too. We do an unboxing, but you can't see that on a podcast.
You know what I like best about Harry's? You can set up reoccurring delivery of your blades for as low as $2. That's half of what you pay for other big brands. So there's no more awkward drugstore interactions, and I save money.
Sounds like a win-win to me.
So don't settle for the status quo. Blaze your own trail with Harry's. Get started with a $13 trial set for just $3 at harrys.com/brohistory. That's harrys.com/brohistory for a $3 trial set.
What happens then when
Without
you get
air
it, you
support? That's a dangerous thing to think about.
That's what you're basing that on. You're also basing it on the fact that they have local protection, right? But what if that local protection, these local leaders, political leaders, security force leaders in those areas around the bases say, you know what? I see how this is going to turn out. One, there's going to be 1,500 Kataib Hezbollah members here tomorrow. They're offering me this amount of money. We've seen that happen before, right? So your hope, your plan on relying on local security forces, that falls away too. And it doesn't have to be every base gets overrun, but what if one base gets overrun and you have a whole bunch of dead Americans? But more importantly, you now have, with these militia forces that are tied to Iran, American service members and contractors, because there's a ton of contractors over there.
Yep.
I think there's about 3,500 American troops total in Iraq and Syria, and there's like 9,000 contractors.
Damn,
right?
That's a lot.
So what if you got you got a handful of dead Americans or whatever, a bunch of wounded, but you say you've got 100 prisoners of war, basically hostages. Right? So you could see how this can get into like a nightmare scenario. And we could be here all night just thinking up other scenarios, right? Other ways this could get really out of hand. And, so this is really dangerous. And hopefully everything goes according to plan. The script is followed. From what you read from NBC and CBS, what the leaks are, what they're being told, it goes as it's being advertised, and that these will be airstrikes and missile strikes against targets in Iraq and Syria that are connected to Iran. Handful of people will be killed. A bunch of missile systems, rocket systems, drone systems, trucks, whatever will get blown up. We'll do that for a bunch of days, and the White House hopes that's enough for Lindsey Graham. They hope that Donald Trump finds something else to yell about, and the Iranians are okay with that. And I'll knock on wood and I'll light a candle and pull out a rosary, and everything else.
Right.
That's the way it goes.
That's scary.
There's certainly other ways that they can escalate as well. They can close down the Strait of Hormuz and just drive up oil prices up to the moon.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly. Going in concert with this, exactly, Henry. In parallel is the world economy collapse, is plunging, right? So in parallel, right? So you're going to have exactly that. And you're going to have the other thing I didn't speak at all about was cyber attacks. Cyber warfare has been going on between the U.S. and Iran, Israel and Iran for more than 2 decades now. Probably even longer. But the idea that, because, here on the East Coast, we're 7,000 miles away from this, we're going to be okay. I don't know. Because the Iranians, if they're competent, if they're serious, which, again, there's no reason to doubt that, won't they have prepared then to do cyber strikes within the United States that would, there's this maxim about escalate to de-escalate, right? So the idea with the cyber attacks would be do enough to cause the other side to back off, right? If show them that you're capable of it, and then if they keep doing, you ratchet it up. So you turn off all the, example, besides attacking government and military targets, you turn off all the gas station pumps for half a day in Milwaukee or something like that, right? Good cause, right? Do something to turn off everybody's Netflix,
I would. Right? I think we would all riot. We'd nuke them if that was the case.
Turn off the lights at the Super Bowl, whatever, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Those are all pretty fanciful, but, the idea being that our infrastructure is vulnerable. Their infrastructure is vulnerable. And the thought is, of course, they're only going to attack government and military targets. But we know that these cyber attacks, basically computer viruses, are able to leak out, right? We know that it has happened. So you could have a situation, a circumstance where they meant to only have it infect the Department of Defense, but it squirted it out and it affected Health and Human Services or whatever, and now, I mean, so like there's a lot to this. And, this sounds all very apocalyptic and maybe exaggerated and hyperbolic, but it all is well within the realm of possibility. And it's one of those things that I think people have to say, well, is the now we might really see the costs of a foreign policy that have brought us to this point.
Is there anyone in the national security establishment, whether they be in the State Department or the White House or wherever, where they think that we can go in a direct conflict with like we can go to war with Iran in a direct military conflict? And I'll add one more thing to it, that we can actually invade Iran and do a regime change.
Well, there are a lot of people, there's a guy, a political scientist, a philosopher from the 1950s who he termed the coin the crackpot realist, C. Wright Mills. And he was one of the first people to stand up against kind of the Cold War mentality, right? The Cold War mania. And there are people out there who who believe things such as, to go to war with Iran, we can get the Azerbaijanis involved. That will pull the Turks into this war, and so you'd have this Turkish-Azerbaijani alliance that would cause a lot of problems for the Iranians, and then we can use the Taliban to attack. There are people who think that
we could use the Taliban?
We could use the Taliban. I mean, we could, we would just offer to send them money and everything else. We know the relationship between the Taliban and Iran. And over the last couple of years since the Taliban in power, they've actually had gunfights on their borders with Iran, Taliban forces and Iranian border, right? I mean, but there are people who think like that. There are also people who look at this and they don't see Iran at all.
Right.
They see Russia. And they say, well, if we can bog down Iran, if we can attack Iran, that means that Iran can't support Russia in its war in Ukraine, and this will weaken Russia. And this eventually, if they can't get the drones from Iran, then it's only a matter of time for Ukraine can win the war. Like that type of thinking. There are people who think that way, who honestly do think that way. So I don't know if there's anyone out there who has ideas about invading Iran, about having hey, we didn't get it. If you look at Iran on the map, and to the left was Iraq, and to the right's Afghanistan. We didn't get it right in those places, but we've learned our lesson now, and we can do it. I mean, there are people who think that way. I mean, I heard that over and over again with regards to the Afghan surge. Oh, we learned from mistakes in Iraq, just like they said. We learned from our mistakes in Vietnam, and so forth. So where those people are at, what positions they're in, I don't know. But there are people who do think that way and believe it. I mean, and the dangerous thing is that they're hanging out with people who believe in the idea of usable nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's the other thing, too. And then you have this whole escalate to de-escalate thing. So what if we use our smallest nuclear weapon, which is the B-6112, which has on the lowest end, it has a 0.3 kiloton yield. Well, the Hiroshima bomb was 15 kilotons. This is 0.3 kilotons. That's nothing. It shouldn't even be called a nuclear weapon.
Right.
Mr. President, it's really an enhanced conventional bomb, an ECB. It's just like torture. It's not torture. It's enhanced interrogation. You know what I mean? So, you can see this, right? And we have generals and admirals who, believe in usable nuclear weapons, as well as like a whole, however many hundreds of think tank cretins in Washington, D.C. who believe that as well, right? And they infect and they tell the members of Congress, hey, no, this is possible. We can do this. This is why we have these weapons. So then the idea is like we could use these to escalate to de-escalate, right? And that would force the regime in Iran to capitulate, right? And just as we can think of this, there are a half dozen probably other insane ideas out there that are well funded, though, in Washington, D.C. where people who think like this have pretty good jobs working at these think tanks, or they are on congressional staffs, or they are political appointees at state or DOD or on the NSC or at CIA. I mean, so what Mills said about the crackpot realists, that wasn't just something from 70 years ago. That's the reality of the U.S. empires. The U.S. empires. Policy-making people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of crackpot theories that you've outlined, but the one that I think is sticking with me the most right now is the idea of using the Taliban somehow against Iran, because just recently I was reading about, because also we haven't talked about the kind of escalation or almost escalation between Pakistan and Iran just like a week ago. And the Taliban's coming out here going like, hey, we should show some restraint here. Like, everyone calm down. The Taliban, right, is calling for restraints. So it's just like, I don't know, man.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of it shows us what we don't know, as well as the fact that if you were to talk about how Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, 14 years ago in 2009, 2010 in Washington, D.C., when the Coindinistas, right? I mean, those are the crackpot realists of that time, but they had a whole cadre of people who believed so fervently in the linkage between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Certainly there are linkages there. But, there are also reasons why they didn't have to be linked. It's the same thing we saw in Iraq, where, when you have a White House and a Pentagon, a CIA that is saying the Sunni insurgency in Iraq is Al-Qaeda, right? When the reality is that the Sunni insurgency was 97% Sunni Iraqi Arabs who were pissed off that we were occupying their country, right? But when you have this portrait of them as all being jihadists, basically, as these, the Sunnis in Iraq would have nothing to do with them except that the jihadists are making them fight us, or they're bribing them to fight us, like that type of thing. When the reality is that they just didn't want to be occupied. I mean, so when you have that type of you saw as well, if you go back 2.5 years now to 2021, and all these experts, what's going to happen in Afghanistan when we pull out, and it's the predictable chorus from these crackpot realists about how Afghanistan's going to become a haven for terrorism again. It's going to be a safe haven for terrorism. The Islamic State is going to flourish. And, within a year's time, they will be launching attacks throughout Europe and in North America. This is what they said. People both in the government and outside the government saying, predicting with an absolute certainty, within a year's time, the Islamic State. And what's happened in the last 2.5 years? The Taliban have killed the Islamic State everywhere they find them. Right. The best antidote against the Islamic State has been the Taliban. And why is that? Because they are not allies. There's so much of a. I mean, it's like that type of refusal to understand. And getting back to what you were saying earlier about just understanding who is this that we are fighting, right? Who is this that we're allied with? I mean, on the other side of it, say, go back to Afghanistan, this is assertion that the people that we are working with in Afghanistan are good people. That, there's some of the really ridiculous lines that they are, basically Jeffersonian Democrats. But the idea that these are the forces of good, we are behind. And when the reality is that the people that we were allied with in Afghanistan were all warlords and drug lords. I mean, so when you don't understand who you are working with, how do you expect to get anything done? You put forward these plans of how we're going to, move into Marja in Helmand province, and we're going to bring government in a box, democracy in a box, and we're going to set up, this, and the reality is that the people we're bringing in to run the government in Helmand province or in Kandahar or Zabul or Kunar or wherever are absolute crooks. Right. And I mean, so in the astonishment that people had when you had really great reporters like Azmat Khan and Anand Gopal in the fall of 2021 who went into southern Afghanistan, and just the response that they got from the local people being so relieved the government was gone. right? Being so relieved the Afghan army and the Afghan police were gone because they were so predatory, right? The people were shocked at this because for 20 years they had been told that the Afghan army, the Afghan police protect the people, right? The Afghan government, those are good people who believe in the same things we believe in. They just want a better country for their people. They want their kids to grow up with the same opportunities we have. And the reality was they were all warlords and drug lords. They were awful. So how do you expect success when your policies are based upon things that have no justice, no justification or validity in reality? Whether it's your opponent or your allies.
Really makes you think twice about the money that was earmarked to Afghanistan when that was its own thing. For the niche programs, I think one of the ones we did an episode once about when we read the budget and we just found the most random things that ended up in the budget. One of them was like women's rights or something. Not even, it wasn't that broad. It was more specific than that. It was like women's literacy in Afghanistan or something like that. And on its own, that sounds fantastic, right. Great. But after you've just painted this picture that this government is just a bunch of crooks, it makes me really think twice. Where did that money
you
actually
find out
go?
it's like a tent. It's just like a tent.
I had this
$20 million.
I had this experience a bunch of years ago. I was on a panel at one of those think tanks in D.C., and this person was going on. This person was going on about how we had to teach the Afghans to grow potatoes or something like that.
Okay.
Sweet potatoes or something. And that would lead the disaffected people of Afghanistan from stopping their support from the Taliban. Mm-hmm. And this person was completely convinced of that because they really did believe that people joined the Taliban because they were disaffected. because they didn't have enough money. So you see all these strategies that we're going to split the insurgency, or I forget what it was called. There was a policy where they were going to pay off. They're not fighting for money. They're fighting because we're occupying them. Mm-hmm. As Azmat Khan found, as she did her investigations in Helmand, her and Anand did such great work both in Afghanistan and then as well in Iraq and Syria, looking at, say, the civilian casualties from American airstrikes. Every family she talked to in Helmand and Kandahar, every family had multiple people killed from American airstrikes. Multiple people killed, right? So the idea that somehow these people or maybe they're not part of the Taliban, but they're supporting the Taliban is going to be is because they need a better cash crop. When they saw their 12-year-old daughter's head taken off by a piece of American shrapnel. The disconnect, again, from reality is just, and I would ask people, many of us have, our own mythologies, our own identities. My grandmother in Ireland, May, born in 1909 in Tipperary, our family was part of the 3rd Tipperary Brigade, right? Really, it's a source of family pride, fought the British, that kind of thing. And so the idea to me, if you came up to me, was what if the British had just taught your family how to grow whatever? Would that have kept them out of the IRA? I'd tell you, what are you, an idiot? Of course not.
Right.
Why do we think that's going to work then? So it's that underpins so much of our policies. Because, these are policies of the empire, and the empire has to have a narrative. We have to have some type of identity to keep us going. Otherwise, people aren't going to serve the empire. People aren't going to be part of, people aren't going to willingly sign up to jump on board the Death Star. Right? They have to believe in what they're doing. So you guarantee use that example, the Star Wars example, those Imperial troops who blew up Alderaan thought that they were blowing up a safe haven for terrorists.
Probably.
They were keeping the rest of the galaxy safe because of the terrorists on Alderaan.
Right.
We just keep getting back in the same place over and over again. Yeah.
The empire has the right to defend itself.
That's right.
Right? I'll tell you what, Alderaan was using human shields. That was the problem.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So it's but it's interesting, you start talking about identity and narrative and everything else. And I was talking about just exactly that, using the Star Wars reference years ago now. And I think I was talking about moral injury and some other things. And I got so excited talking about Star Wars. I said, when we blew up the Death Star, right? Because as a kid going to see that film, I was, what came out in 77, so I was 4, so, but like, that was such a big part. Star Wars is such a big part
We all grew
of my
up with
life.
it,
And
yeah.
that myth soaking into my brain and tied so into, right, our identity as being the good guys. When I guess there's, I just saw this, I guess there is, George Lucas supposedly said he was thinking about the Viet Cong when he wrote it all, right? You know what I mean? But to a kid growing up in New Jersey and New York, we were the rebels, and then Red Dawn comes out. And of course, we're the Wolverines. And then, of course, you get to Iraq and Afghanistan, you realize we're not the Wolverines, man. Those kids putting IEDs in the side of the road, those are the Wolverines. We're not here with white hats on. As far as the people around here are concerned, we've got black hats on.
So we have 3 potential hotspots in the Middle East right now. So we have Iraq, we have Lebanon, and we have Yemen. Right now, it seems like the U.S. is just going to, periodically bomb the Houthis or whatever. It doesn't seem like it's working.
And that's what the president said, right?
Yeah. And it's crazy to me, just to go back to what you said about them refusing to link the war in Gaza or the war on Gaza with these Houthis attacks.
Right.
Are they really that blind? Are they really saying that there's no connection between that? Because I swear I've seen New York Times articles or mainstream or corporate press articles that have linked the attacks together. Are they really that self-propagandized to believe that?
I think it's these spokespeople. You see this, Matt Lee from the Associated Press has been doing such a great job at the State Department, just hammering away. Whether it's Matt Miller or Vendit Patel, whoever's behind that podium, just have you seen this video of the Israelis doing whatever? Every day it's something different. We can't even keep up with it, right? But we try and wrap our heads around what we just saw, and there's literally another video or another report or audio of some other war crime. We can't even keep up with it. But and they obfuscate. They're trained. They're good at what they do. And then they look at a guy like John Kirby and they see what he did. And John Kirby the other day getting questioned by actually a friend of mine, Kimberly Halkett, who is Al Jazeera's White House correspondent, and Kimberly asking Admiral Kirby about what kind of political considerations come into all of this. And Kirby getting so upset. I've never seen him lose his composure this way. About how the president is not looking at the poll numbers when he does foreign policy.
You're right.
Is that right? Exactly. Come on. But what you see though is that if you want to be Admiral Kirby, if you want to be the man who represents the president's foreign policy to the world, if you want to get to Matt Miller's spot, right? And so you see. You see a picture of Tony Blinken talking across the table from Netanyahu, and there's Matt Miller two seats down from him, right? Because the press spokespeople are they're not just given a script to read. They're in all these meetings, particularly the most senior ones, right? They're the ones who are coming up with these ideas about how do we craft this, how do we massage this, and so what you get from that is if I want to rise to the top, I need to go out there every day and practice pissing on people's legs and telling them it's raining, because that's essentially what they're doing, right?
Right.
So the willingness to do it, and the only thing that's more disturbing than how psychopathic it is the fact that if Matt Miller or John Kirby said today, or tomorrow morning, I'm not doing this anymore. You know how long the line would be of people who would place him? There's 1,000 people in the State Department there on 23rd Street who would walk right down to the press room and take that spot. No questions asked. 1,000 in that building probably who would do that, right? So, that's That's what we're up against here, right? Is there's always going to be people who are willing to say these things, to do these sorts of things. And, because that's you get into whole questions now about proximity to power. Why do we have journalists why is Matt Miller, and then it's Matt Miller and Sam Husseini and Max Blumenthal, is about 5 or 6 people in that State Department press room who are asking questions, who are asking about war crimes that are clearly on display. How come the CBS and the NBC and the CNN and the Fox people aren't asking those questions? Mm-hmm. My friend Kimberly from Al Jazeera, she's in row 8 in that White House press room. Mm-hmm. How come everybody in all those seats in front of her, how come they're not asking her those questions? And how come they roll their eyes when she asks those type of questions? That's how you end up on Al Jazeera. Mm. That's how you end up, doing the gray zone or something like that, right? And I've got great respect for both institutions because they're good, particularly my friends over at Al Jazeera. They're great journalists, yeah.
Oh, no. So you just made me think of a video I saw today of the ladies at Code Pink, and I think you're friends with them, right? Or you know the ladies over at Code Pink. Yeah. They were talking to Brian Mast.
Oh God, I saw that video. Yeah.
Where they're confronting him about these war crimes that are taking place, and this guy's a straight up sadist. Right. He is gleefully enjoying this conversation.
Right.
It was stomach turning.
Yeah. Right. Basically they're asking him about the children being killed there.
Right.
Yeah, they're asking about children being killed, and he's basically saying, well, they should have overthrown the government.
Right. Yeah,
he says there's more that needs to be destroyed. Quote from him.
Code Pink, God bless them, are doing such great work, doing exactly that. Being in the halls of Congress, asking our members of Congress about this. And they posted on their Instagram and everything else. And the responses and the non-responses are horrifying. Matt Gaetz today, who was dressed, people need to look, he looks like a Disney villain. He's just all in black. People need to look this up. It's almost as if it was staged or something.
Yeah.
But he's talking about how the ICJ is a globalist institution and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And how this is the same guy, though, who has done a lot of good things in trying to stop war. He has been at the forefront of trying to end, say the war in Yemen, right? He has done, but now on this, though, he is, you see also, too, the responses that they get with the talking points, including they are still hearing from senators talking points about beheaded babies, something that was debunked and shown to be false months ago.
Right.
You have American senators still saying Hamas beheaded 40 babies. Right? As they walk in, as Medea tell you, the one, I forget, was it Cornyn? Or is it, I forget who it was, the one that she was, the one in particular, as he was walking into an intelligence briefing. And that's the thing. What are these people being told? Who's briefing them? A number of years ago, it gets into all kinds of stuff now about how the Congress works and what these people know, what don't they know, what don't they want to know. You have your psychopaths like Mast, right? Who, you have your Tom Cottons, you have your Lindsey Grahams, and then you have others that are going to go along with what their party tells them to. So I worked closely with a number of years with Walter Jones, who was a congressman from North Carolina, who, particularly after Ron Paul left, was the most anti-war Republican in the House.
Mm-hmm. And he was the guy who coined Freedom Fries, and he made a big 180.
Right. That's exactly right. And he represents Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. And what was happening was he was all in on this because he was told he was supposed to be all in on this. And everything that was being presented to him, everything that was being shown to him What made him I have to do everything I can to support the troops. If the French aren't going to support our troops, we're going to call them freedom fries. I mean, his intentions in this were, and he'll tell you, he believed what he was being told. How could you be presented with all the information Congress was being presented in 2002 and 2003 and believe any other way? Why would the intelligence agencies be lying to us? Why would the Pentagon be lying to us about war? Right? So what happens then, Jones starts to go to all these funerals because he represents Camp Lejeune, and he starts hearing from other people, and he starts, and then he realizes this is bullshit. This is war is built on lies, and he becomes, along with Ron Paul at that point, one of the, but anyway, Mr. Jones, he passed in 2019, unfortunately, but I remember meeting with him in 2018, and he was saying the same things he told me all these times before, that most members of Congress are going to defer to their leadership. So he would, and a number of times he brought me into Congress to have lunch with like other members, and trying to get these guys and these men and women to do something about these wars. And the response that they would tell him, Walter, I got it, I understand, but DeLay is telling me this, or Bonner's telling me this. Mm-hmm. Paul Ryan just said, if blah blah blah, and then they make an example out of Jones. So Jones, by the time he dies, the last 4 or 5 years he's in Congress, probably maybe even longer, he is by far the most senior member of Congress who doesn't have a chairmanship. Mm-hmm. Right? He's not even on like some low subcommittee about parks and recreation.
Right.
He's got nothing, right? Because that's how they're punishing him. And, you've got a man of conviction then at least, but what about all these other opportunists there who are in Congress, right? And then you have other things that you start looking at. If you go to Congress, you walk into a congressional office, you won't be able to tell because they won't be in uniform, they'll be in a suit. But pretty much every congressional office, I shouldn't say every, but like it's a lot of congressional offices have military officers who are working in them. About 20 some odd years ago, they started this program. They always had military officers over there, but not a lot, And then 20 some odd years ago, and then it gets really picked up when Bob Gates takes over as Secretary of Defense. And it's this idea that we will give every congressional office a military officer. And what happens is you've got a free staff person. We're not paying for this person. And you know what? Who the Pentagon's saying over there are amazing officers. They're sending the best that they can find. Right? These are men and women who are going to be the first ones in the office in the morning and the last ones to leave. Mm-hmm. They are going to be so professional, you are going to hate the rest of your staff. Like that kind of thing. Like these, right? But who do they actually work for? They don't work for the member of Congress. They work for the Secretary of Defense. Who's paying them? Who's doing their fitness reports, right? Who's going to promote them? Who's going to give them their next assignment? Mm-hmm. Right? So you have, and then what you also have is that, okay, I've got this military officer. All right, he or she is going to be my military affairs person. Who else would be better? So now if you have a member of Congress, particularly one who's not on, say, Armed Services Committee or Intelligence Committee, right, or Foreign Affairs, that member of Congress turns to a military officer for their opinion on something. Mm-hmm. Tell me about this F-35 program. I keep hearing how it's terrible. Well, sir, yeah, there were problems with it, but it's up to speed now. I just spoke to the guy at the Air Force about this, and they're saying, yeah, that report, that's not correct. That was based on old data, right? So F-35, we're really behind it. We really think that just like Iraq, we learned our lessons in Vietnam. Oh, Afghanistan, we learned our lessons in, I've heard some Israeli basically say this. Look, we've invaded Lebanon twice. This third time, we will get it right.
Oh, Jesus.
Right?
Yeah.
So that type of thing. So that type of, and then the other aspect, that's so nefarious about how Congress gets their information on these things is that, and I heard this from a military officer assigned to Bob Casey's office, Senator Bob Casey's office, who's Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And, this guy tells me that, and I confirmed it then with other folks too, is that, 7 out of 10 of the briefings that the members of Congress get come not from the CIA or the DIA or the NSC or the Pentagon or whoever, but they come from the think tanks. So it's the Institute for Study of War. It's the American Enterprise Institute. It's Center for New American Security. It's Center for, CSIS. Like all these think tanks that are funded by Boeing and Lockheed and Raytheon, and they're also funded by the Emiratis and the Qataris and the Saudis, right? I mean, so that's where where are these members of Congress getting their information from? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So you can understand how there is this, willing, and then we didn't even get into discuss, say in particular with the Gaza thing, the role of the Israel lobby and all that, the amount of money involved. And so whether these members of Congress are greedy for that money or scared to death of it, we have here in North Carolina, we have two, apex victory sheet last year, 2022 elections. I think they have 14 or 15 members of Congress that they claimed. They put out in big, graphic detail how we defeated these people. We kept these people out of Congress, talking about all Democrats, right? Two of them were here in North Carolina, Erica Smith in the 1st District and Nita Alam in the 4th District. They brought in, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even over $1 million to defeat these two people here in North Carolina. I mean, we were familiar with what happened with Nina Turner in Ohio. Summer Lee was able to get through it in Pennsylvania, but most people that AIPAC went against in the Democratic primaries didn't get through. And so you have members of Congress who are scared to death knowing that. Mm-hmm. So here's your thing, Mr. This issue that you really don't know much about, it can go either way. If you open your mouth, you're going to get in a lot of trouble either way. So you can take our money, or we can give all that money to somebody who's going to primary you. Mm-hmm. So you have all these pressures on members of Congress that helps you understand how can they not do something about this? How can they still be clinging to this idea of 40 beheaded babies, or acknowledge that October 7th was terrible, it was atrocious, it was a war crime, of course it was, but this genocide that's occurring. So it is. It's you look at it and then you couple it with this is a very depressing conversation.
Yeah.
You couple it with our spokespeople, you couple it with the way policy is made, and you want to go live in the woods.
Kind of.
Yeah. It's so. There's these reports that the Israelis are planning on invading Lebanon. And that just seems absolutely crazy.
Right.
Just the fact that they have their hands full in Gaza.
Right. Let alone the West Bank. I mean, you're looking at...
Yeah, let alone with the West,
right?
with the West Bank. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure a lot of this has to do with Netanyahu keeping his political career alive.
Yeah.
But what do you think the chances are of something like that actually happening? The Israelis going on with a military campaign or actually invading Lebanon?
You look at it again, like with the history. Why would they do that? Third time's a charm. Why would you do this? But you had earlier this week, beginning of the week, Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, reportedly said Israeli forces will be going into Lebanon very soon. He said,
Very soon.
What was he talking about? Was he talking about, an invasion? Was he talking, we know that the Israelis have put special operations troops in there, certainly then their strikes and everything else. Was he just talking about that? Or was he talking about something a lot more serious? You had this move of Israeli forces out of Gaza. And what was that for? Were they replaced? Was it just a rest and refit rotation? Were they moved up to the West Bank? Or were they put into place or were getting ready to have this war in Lebanon? Because there are people in Israel, of course, who want a greater Israel, and that, of course, includes the Gaza Strip, includes the West Bank and East Jerusalem, but for many of them, it includes Lebanon. There are, if you go into if you go to like the offices of some of these Zionists, they have their maps of Greater Israel, and that includes parts of Lebanon. So this desire to maybe they think and they see, if we're going to do it, we need to do it now. We will never get an opportunity as good as right now. I think that's some of it. I think certainly that's what's been pushing this ethnic cleansing in Gaza. This is our chance to do it. The Hamas attack on October 7th gave us the reason to do this. This opened a door to do what we have wanted to do for a very long time. Netanyahu's decision on this, we will see. Obviously, once he is no longer able to claim that we are in an emergency situation and we can't have elections, and there are elections. I mean, Netanyahu's popularity makes Trump and Biden look like Beyonce and Taylor Swift.
Seriously,
it's right. I mean, so he knows that. But so the thing about Netanyahu is how many times over the last 25 years or so have people said Netanyahu's done, he's through. We
had a whole episode saying goodbye to him the last time he got kicked out, and it was actually really funny.
Yeah, but I mean, so what has he done? Like just watching it today, and the idea of that the far right, the extremists, Ben Gvir and Smotrich being the two most prominent extremists in the Israeli government, of course, and but then the Yair Lapid, the head of the opposition, they're both making statements about how they can save the government, right? The extremists, Ben Gvir, and Smotrich, saying that if there's a bad deal, we're going to leave the government. If you create a bad deal for us with Hamas, we are leaving the government, and the government will collapse, right? Which means give us a good deal on this, and we'll keep you in power. So basically, no deal with Hamas. Let us do what we want. Let us that Resettle Gaza conference we had on the weekend. We put together a pretty good list of things we want to do. Let's do that.
It's blackmail, basically.
Yeah, and then, but on the other side, coming from Yair Lapid in the opposition, is the offer of you bring us into this government, we will keep the government afloat, right? But that entails, no more ethnic cleansing. I mean, there's no one in Israeli politics who's going to get into the cabinet or the certainly the prime minister's chair who is not going to have some type of iron wall security on top of Gaza. But it's a question of whether or not it is something that whether it's a question of occupation, basically, and the Palestinians are allowed to return and rebuild, or it's a question of ethnic cleansing, and which way does Netanyahu go with that? Netanyahu certainly has, I think, his desires for what he wants to see done, but I think most of us would agree his chief desire is his own political survival. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, so it would be interesting. I mean, we'll see how he chooses to keep his government afloat, how he chooses to keep himself in power. Is it through launching a war in Lebanon? And that's how he stays in power, because you can't dissolve the government in a time of war like that. Is it by aligning with the right wing, the extremists, right, and going along with their plans? Or is it aligning with the opposition and going back to 2022 or so? Yeah. So it's certainly the thing that I think that hurts a lot of us, hurts me, is that the fate of the Palestinians are it's so far from their hands, and even all the plans you've seen that's been rolled out, they're all awful. Mm-hmm. This thing about, we'll see what this ceasefire deal looks like. On what I read, doesn't seem too bad, but what comes after that 45-day mark? This phase 3 that they talk about. What does that really mean? Mm-hmm. And what are the Egyptians and the things that the Egyptians and the Saudis are proposing? I wouldn't trust any of that. I mean, this idea that Saudi Arabia gets normalization, or Israel gets normalization with Saudi Arabia gets to claim that they created a Palestinian state. And a Palestinian state is nothing more than they put a new fresh paint and a new logo on Palestinian Authority headquarters, and that's it. Nothing else changes, though. So it's very, of course, the genocide itself is awful, is so disturbing, but the prospects are awful too.
It's just like, how do these people even go back into Gaza at this point when over 50% of the residential buildings have been destroyed? And like, how is that even a safe environment, like physically a safe environment?
Not. I think
for
that's
you?
kind of, that was the point. That was the point of If you just took the Israeli, military brass at their word right in the beginning, right after October 7th, they aimed for a campaign of maximum destruction. And they were very clear about that. Some of them have walked it back a little bit to make it, more buttoned up and more strategic about, killing terrorists and, getting rid of Hamas. But the initial knee-jerk reaction was maximum destruction. And they've achieved that. And they are going to continue to achieve that for the foreseeable future until there is either a ceasefire, and even then, like you said, Matt, what happens after the 45 days? What does that phase 3 look like?
And the thing is, if you've got a family, you've survived through this, and you're in Rafah or wherever, and the opportunity comes to leave, and everything has been destroyed. Everything has been destroyed, and the agricultural land is being destroyed. They did this thing with they tried to flood the tunnels. They said they were going to do this.
Yeah,
flood the tunnels.
Seawater.
Yeah, and I guess they tried it, and it didn't work that well. But was the purpose to drown and flush out Hamas forces? Probably was the prime purpose, but there was this really great secondary ancillary effect of it's going to destroy the water table, it's going to destroy the groundwater,
right.
It's going to make the land unusable, right? And then you just go from there. There's a story in Haaretz today that about the Israeli soldiers are burning homes down. They're burning homes down by the hundreds. Just burning them, and we know about the ones that are getting blown up in this buffer zone. And then, there's no schools, there's no bakeries. So you bring your family back. What's your kid's future?
Right.
Let alone the fact that the legacy of war with all the unexploded ordnance, all the shells, the fact they've been using white phosphorus, when these vehicles get hit and destroyed, there's all types of toxic chemicals that come out of them. So you've got the legacies of war there. You've got the destruction of your society. Cemeteries are gone.
Right.
The poets and the professors and the teachers and the doctors are gone.
Right.
You've got
mosques are gone.
Everything is gone. So if you were presented with the opportunity to leave, and then also too, you do go back and you're living like that, and everyone is sick and everyone's hungry and everything's destroyed, and you've got to walk a mile and a half every day just to get water, that type of life. What about it could happen again, right? That fear of it can happen again. So the threat of it is enough, I think, to make many people, and as much as steadfast as you can be, and the Palestinians are the most steadfast people in the world, right? It's a term they use, steadfast. If you've got a family, it's a really tough decision to make. Maybe if you're a single person or you're an older person, I'm not going to leave. But if you've got a family, if your kids got through this, you're going to bring them back into it and put them at risk of it happening in the future? We can recite all the times you've had these aerial campaigns, right? 09, 14, 21. There was the March of the Great Return in 2018, 2019. Just these, right? Then you had this, and what's to stop it from happening again? That's the purpose, is to make it uninhabitable, not just physically, but I think also mentally make it uninhabitable.
So how does this play out? So the 2 million people are displaced. I don't know where they go. They become refugees across different European states and maybe the U.S. and different Arab states. And there's this big Palestinian diaspora that's spread out across the world. And then the Israelis move in, they clean everything up, and they start building beach settlements in Gaza. Right. And then the world becomes
the world keeps spinning. Yeah,
the world just keeps on spinning. And then
what is it that
not until
said?
The West Bank is next.
What Thucydides said something about the strong will do as they can, and the weak will suffer as they must. Is that the case here? And I think this has been such a test for what was attempted to be accomplished at the end of the Second World War. The idea of that we cannot go forward, particularly in this nuclear age, with this type of barbarism. We cannot go forward with this type of might makes right. That we have to have order. We have to have international law. We have to have international institutions. We cannot use might makes right. And this is just such a great test of that, is this of where do we go forward as a species, witnessing this and witnessing the we'll see what happens in the ICJ, but we've seen what's happened already in the UN, where one nation, our nation, has stopped any attempts at diplomacy, has stopped any attempts, and you watch, I watched it the other day, Ambassador Greenfield, our ambassador at the UN, and what she said, it was like, I mean, you'd have to put George Orwell, Lewis Carroll, and the best writers Saturday Night Live ever had together in a room to come up with something like what she said there. This whole thing about it's not genocide, it's self-defense, and we believe in the protection of civilians, and guarantee you within the hour another C-17 landed in Israel with bombs on it from the Americans to the Israelis. I mean, so where we're at right now as a species, basically as a human race, in terms of this test of what was attempted to be done by the powers that won the Second World War. So the men of the Allied armies, the Americans, the British, the Soviets. What they attempted to do. This test that we have right here is so important, and I think we're probably we're not very optimistic that the test is going to be passed in a manner that leads to a better future. So as much as, this idea that that won't occur to the Palestinians, that they won't face some terrible future, and that including the option of them completely being displaced completely, whether they end up in some tent city in Sinai, or they all get put on boats and planes and sent to the four corners of the world. I'm struggling to find a way where it's, or the best case, I think, is that you have this thing where Netanyahu agrees with Lapid, and it becomes, okay, they're just going to put their buffer around Gaza. They're going to get some type of Palestinian Authority control of it. There's going to be some kind of rebuilding, but that's not going to go anywhere, and it's just going to be the most ruined, awful, sick place in the world, as if the open air concentration camp that it was before wasn't. This will be that times, this is what will look like, what a concentration camp looks like after it was, they came through and they attempted to kill everybody. So, is that the best case? Is the fact that that's how the Palestinians they're allowed to stay, they're allowed to go back, but this is what they have? Is that the best case we're looking at? And unfortunately, I think that's it.
I mean, at this point, if I'm putting myself in the shoes of a young Palestinian family, the best case for me would be getting the fuck out of there, right? and saying goodbye and essentially just becoming refugees at this point. Because like you said, it can happen again. It most likely will happen again.
Sometimes a tactical retreat makes sense.
That's right. I mean, the idea, it's not like the Israelis are going to, nothing is going to change. It's going to look like it did on October 6th, except they've destroyed everything and they've killed, they've killed, wounded, or made missing 5% of the population. Right, so it's going to look like what do we think it's going to look like? As you said, they've destroyed upwards of 70% of the buildings there. That's how is that possible? Even when we bombed, and if you went back and that's on the level of what we did to Tokyo in 1945.
Yeah, fire bombings,
right? I mean, and that was because they have wood buildings, right? And we dropped incendiary bombs. But even then, there were parts that were not completely destroyed. Here you look at the maps, and the whole all of Gaza. The only places that don't, I'm sure you guys have seen the same maps I have, were the little red dots, right, of all the destroyed buildings.
Yeah.
And there are some places where there are no red dots. It's because nobody can live there. That's because that land is completely useless.
Right.
Other than that, I mean, so it's really what will come of it. And then the other side of that then is how will revenge come? This is, I think, why a lot of us have been saying how, it might have been the politically best thing for the Israeli government to do, but it was strategically is terrible. How does this, unless you achieve your ethnic cleansing, right? So unless you get those 2.3 million people there, and then what are you going to do about the 3 million people in the West Bank, right? Because they're those are their brothers and sisters that you just did this to, but also as well, they expect to be next. And the settlers are going nuts and everything else. So it's only a matter of time until you have the third intifada there. So how, as well, then you've completely isolated yourself now. But I think that the Israeli strategy or the Israeli idea of it is that as long as we have the Americans, we don't care. And as long as we can control the American Congress and the White House, because the American political system is one of legalized bribery, we're okay. And we will survive, and we will just be Fortress Israel. And that matches up with our ideologies because we are the chosen people, and the chosen people are against, everyone's against us, so on and so forth, etc. But, so if you don't have the ethnic cleansing occur, and you have 2 million people, 2.1 million people, rather than 2.2 million people, say, in Gaza, well, then what comes next? You think that the Gazans and the Palestinians are just going to say, oh, well, you know what? You really taught us. We're not going to do anything. We're just going to sit here quietly, and we learned our lesson.
Right.
I mean, right? I mean, so how, let alone all the issues with Lebanon, Syria, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah, with Israel, I'm of the opinion that they're on the way of becoming a failed state. Not now, not within the next decade, but I think sometime in the mid-century, maybe 40, 50 years from now, these problems are all going to catch up with them, and I don't know how that state's going to survive. If you just look at public opinion in the U.S. and just really across the world, and if you just look at public opinion with Gen Z versus baby boomers, it's like the complete opposite in their feelings towards Israel. Like, it's something about 80% of baby boomers have a positive, they take the Israeli side of the narrative, and then Gen Z, it's like 80% are on the side of the Palestinians. I think this public sentiment's going to catch up with them in the U.S., and it will eventually become politically toxic to be a hardcore, sputtering Zionist in Congress. And just Israel's having their own demographic problems with the really big Haredi birth rates. They're becoming way more right-wing and extreme. The settler problem is just getting worse and worse. I think it's a ticking time bomb. So the types of things, people accuse us all the time of being anti-Israel. The type of things that we suggest will make Israelis safer.
Right.
It will make the country more sustainable in the long run. It's, neither of us have like any type of vendetta against the Israelis or Jews. It's just that what the state is doing is suicide.
If it were our state, we would be doing the exact same thing. We're very consistent in that respect.
Yeah. But I mean, it is what it is. Like, if the big canard is that they equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, which is crazy, because the biggest critics and the biggest critics of Israel in the world are left-wing American Jews, right. Or at least the most prominent ones. So it's just, It's but the point is, like, this whole system is just not sustainable. It's just not sustainable for them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I felt that way when I was there in 2017, and I was in the West Bank for 3 weeks and saw that, and this occupation is not sustainable. I will say, with the American political support, though, and I just saw this. Someone had written this in 2017, saying, AIPAC is the Democratic version of the NRA. Right. And so you can have, right. I mean, so it's possible to have things where Congress is just not going to do what 90% of Americans want. So, I mean, I think that is the fear that I have, is that it will become that type of thing. Yeah, right. I mean, but in terms of Israel itself and how does it sustain this? First of all, half the Israeli public is exempted from military service or something, like that, which shows you that split. So, and the military is many Israelis on the left, or secular Israelis will be the ones who would say the military is doing the work of those who are exempted from being in the military. I mean, just one example of like the issues there. And I've heard, I've never seen anything, documentation wide or report, but you hear anecdotally how so many secular Israelis are leaving. Right, that there is a population loss, even though there is on the religious side there is like you said, very great birth rates, but on the secular side, there is a fleeing of the country, if you will. And I've never seen that quantified, and that just might be completely anecdotal. But you also can see, though, in Israel itself, it's not the same Israel it was in the 40s and 50s, particularly the spirit of socialism and the kibbutzes and the healthcare for all. You've seen very much a corporate capitalist mentality take hold there. That quality of life is not what it was supposed to be. And I think maybe just see it in the fact that the Labor Party, a socialist party, I think they only have like 3 or 4 seats, and that's it, right? And meanwhile, the first 10 Israeli prime ministers were Labor Party guys, or women, I should say, right? I mean, so, I think you have a society there that has undergone a lot, in not even touching upon being an occupying power, right? Being a power that has been conducting ethnic cleansing. So yeah, I mean, how is this sustained? And I think it is this idea of like, if you were to talk to those in Israel who believe in this, I think it comes back to this idea of Fortress Israel. And as long as we have the Americans behind us, we can do what we want. And I think that's the plan with the ICJ and the UN. I think would be the plan. I think they would prefer some type of, get to that point where they have normalized relations with the entire Arab world. But if that falls apart, so be it. We've survived so long, we will, and there's also something you said, that these are religious people. They believe that God is on their side. We would fight against the Taliban, and not really have that understanding that these are men who really do believe that God is on their side, so you have to factor that in as well, that this is just not ideology, but this is religion in the sense of the idea of that greater Israel being achieved, that they are part of a longer cosmic plan that has been running for eons, for millennia. It goes back thousands of years, and they are fulfilling it. And we certainly have that here in the U.S. I mean, the American exceptionalism is a form of religion. There are people who really do believe that we are a different people, that we are maybe for some of the politicians, it's because what they're expected to say. But, this idea that we are an essential nation, there are people who really do believe that.
Yeah, it's, what Israel reminds me of? It reminds me of like an interwar state, like an interwar Romania or something like that. They're like a 20th century concept stuck into 21st century. Mm-hmm. And I think the contradiction is so big that it just can't last. Like it it won't be able to withstand like the global trends of liberalism, just because of just the contradictions of this ethnic, racial state.
Yeah,
the contradictions that brings.
Yeah, people describe it as the last colonial enterprise, right? And you've heard it described in that way, of that it is a 20th century entity residing in the 21st century. That it has.
Well, I mean it more in like the blood and soil aspect.
Okay.
Like after like interwar Germany or interwar like Yugoslavia or Serbia, or when these groups were when ethnic nationalism was on the rise, and people really started tracing back their ethnic heritage to their empires that may or may have not existed 1,000 years before. There's the identity of it, the ethno-nationalism aspect. Yeah,
that's what you're talking about. Yeah, and because I mean, I've heard people describe those who push the fulfillment of the Zionist ambition, like this greater Israel, is there are those the far right, the ultra nationalist religious extremists, your Smotriches and Ben Gavirs, but that there are also more nationalist types, whose identity is, as you said, like a blood and soil type thing. It comes from the sacrifices of what came before, and fulfilling the aspirations of those who died to get you to this place, right? And so it becomes this kind of manufactured identity that, of course, in Israel's case, plays upon what has occurred to the Jews for centuries, right? I mean, it plays upon all those traditions, all those that identity, those stories, but is separate. And I think that's where you see a lot of these national security, the security types, the Netanyahu types. I think they fall into that camp, and they want to see a greater Israel. They want to see an Israel that is secure, that has defeated its enemies, has humbled its enemies, and is not under threat any longer. But being in that fortress mentality, having that siege mentality, gives them purpose. It gives them identity. And so I think it's where you see this marriage between them and the religious right, that of course believes it because a magic man in the sky says it should be theirs.
Yeah, in the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, and it's also comes from the Christian Christian Zionists foster that as well. We can go into a whole conversation about like religious Zionism versus secular Zionism.
It's pretty amazing stuff
that I would love to have because we love talking about that. But we've already kept you for an hour, for almost 2 hours at this point. So we want to be respectful of your time. Danny, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Honestly, no. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us on this. Maybe one day we can do a more at length episode about comparing our political situations with Star Wars, because we are also both Star Wars nerds, and I think the parallels are uncanny.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly. That'd be fun to do, and also very insightful. Well, I mean, one of the things, it's like kind of a foundational text for me, is if people are familiar with the theologian Walter Wink and his myth of redemptive violence. And one of the essays where he talks about that, he bases it on Star Wars. He uses Star Wars to explain this idea of a myth of redemptive violence, which defines so much of our society or who we are as a political species, right? And this is this idea that that's how you solve problems, you achieve justice, you create a better world, you keep yourself safe. It's through violence. And if that was the case, the American foreign policy in the Middle East, the results would have been much, much different, right? So, but yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you. Appreciate it. And just let everyone know where to find your work. Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Matthew P. Hoh, P as in Patrick. I'm the Associate Director for the Eisenhower Media Network. So if you just Google Eisenhower Media Network, you'll find us. There's about 12 or 13 of us who are part of that. And as well as Substack. I write occasionally on Substack. And so just Google Matthew Hoh Substack, and that will come up.
All right. You heard him. All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening to another episode. If you want to support the show, make sure that you rate the podcast on Spotify or on Apple. And then you can also join our Patreon, get access to our Slack. Danny, anything else?
Nope.
My friend? All right. Peace, guys.
Peace.